This episode is so overly hated on and so underrated. Like, I understand why some people don't like this, and there's definitely elements of this story that I'm not a big fan of. Like, the paving slab joke at the end does not need to be there. But at the end of the day, it's not something you can really say makes the whole episode awful. But I also am not the biggest fan of the Absorbaloff. I don't think the villain for this story needed to be so comedic and so stupid looking, because the concept of this episode itself as a Dr. Light story, I think the first Dr. Light story of the new era, is a really good idea, getting to see these normal people and how they've all come across the Doctor and they're all trying to find the Doctor, and getting to see how the Doctor impacts just normal people like Jackie and all these other people that are part of Linda is a really cool idea. I just think it could have done with having like an actual serious villain, maybe even still the Absorbaloff, or a creature that had the same kind of abilities but not played in a comedic way would have been really interesting, because the rest of the story is just great, but it is let down by its comedic points and the Absorbaloff himself. So like I say, I do get why people are not a big fan of this episode and why people were let down by this episode, but I personally still think it's really underrated and definitely overhated on, especially when the episode right after it is so much worse, which I'll get into. I find it so weird that this is the episode that people talk about and hate on so much, when Fear Her immediately follows it and is so much worse. I think the reason people like to talk about Love and Monsters more than Fear Her when they're talking about bad episodes is because there's so much more to be offended by in Love and Monsters when it comes to like the Absorbaloff and the awful jokes that are in it. And it's just a lot more interesting to talk about when talking about a bad story, whereas Fear Her is just boring. That's all there is to it. It's just so boring. So there's almost nothing to kind of talk about when talking about bad episodes with it, because you just kind of almost forget it exists, because it's just so bland. And so maybe that's why Love and Monsters gets brought up a lot more than Fear Her does. But I just think it's so unfair how hated Love and Monsters is, and Fear Her just never gets brought up.